He awoke with his heart racing, as if he had been ripped from another world. It was still dawn, the room silent, but the image remained too vivid to ignore. In the dream, there was no luxury, no buildings, no wealth, only a dry, forgotten place where children walked barefoot on the cracked earth, sharing what little they had, waiting for something that never came. Among them, a child approached slowly, stopped before him and spoke with a calmness that pierced his soul. "Uncle, we're waiting for you. This is your place to let loose." There was no request for money, no crying, no despair, just the truth. He tried to take a deep breath upon waking to convince himself it had only been a dream, but something inside him knew it wasn't. The phrase kept echoing, like a call that wouldn't be postponed. Over the days, the unease grew, distracting him, stealing his peace, until he began to search silently, cross-referencing maps, images, and accounts, looking for a place that seemed to already know him before he even found it. And when he finally saw that forgotten region of the world, the same weight gripped his chest. Without telling anyone, he decided to go. Not out of curiosity, not out of strategy, but because they were dreams that didn't ask for explanation, they asked for answers. Before we delve into this amazing story, tell me which city and state you're watching from. Leave a comment and I'll reply with gratitude. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like this video. We want to share more stories like this. In the days that followed that dream, he tried in every way to continue his life as he always had. Meetings started on time, decisions were made with the same precision as before, contracts continued to be signed, but nothing seemed to truly fit. There was a constant noise inside him, a silent unease that wouldn't subside even when everything around him was in order. The image of that place insisted on returning at the most unexpected moments. While listening to reports, while walking through silent corridors, while observing perfectly functioning cities on the other side of the world. It was always the same feeling, as if a part of him was late for some essential appointment that didn't appear on the agenda. The child's phrase would emerge without warning, not as a sound, but as a firm presence. "We are waiting for you." He couldn't explain why it affected him so much. He only knew that ignoring it seemed increasingly impossible. He didn't tell anyone about the dream. He kept it to himself, like someone guarding something too sacred to be exposed to outside logic. Instead, he began to research in silence. At first, his searches were vague, almost aimless, forgotten regions, places without basic access, isolated communities. Then, the searches became more specific, as if he were following an invisible map that only he could see. He read accounts, observed images, cross-referenced information, feeling a growing tightness in his chest with each new discovery. The further he progressed, the more he recognized the dream's setting. Not exactly the same, but close enough to send shivers down his spine. It was as if that place had been presented to him even before he found it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the routine of that forgotten place remained harsh and repetitive. The children woke up early, not by choice, but out of necessity. The search for water was part of the beginning of each day, as was the uncertainty about the next meal. Even so, something persisted there, a silent dignity, a strength that could not be explained by scarcity. People shared what little they had, helped each other without expecting recognition, sustained life with creativity and courage. The children learned early to care for one another, to wait, to endure. There were no promises, but there was faith. Not the kind spoken aloud, but the kind manifested in the insistence on continuing. Among them was the child of the dream. She didn't stand out by shouting or demanding attention. She observed, she waited. Back to the life he knew, he began to notice things that had previously gone unnoticed. The ease with which resources were wasted, The speed with which small problems were treated as major crises, the amount of energy used to maintain appearances while other places struggled just to survive. It wasn't guilt he felt, it was responsibility. Something inside him was beginning to shift, as if the center of his own life was slowly being displaced. He had helped causes before, made donations, funded projects, but none of that resembled what was happening now. This didn't come from reason. It came from a calling that accepted no substitutes. After weeks of silent searching, he found it. A small point on the map, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore once you know it. The images showed exactly what he had seen in the dream. The dry land, the children gathered together, the attentive gazes. Upon seeing it, he felt no surprise. He felt recognition, as if he was saying to himself, "It's here." He closed the computer, leaned back in his chair, and remained silent for long minutes. There was no euphoria, no fear. There was decision, and true decisions, he had learned early on, make no noise. He called his advisors and announced a trip. He didn't explain the reason in detail. He only said he needed to see a place in person. There were questions, attempts to rearrange the schedule, suggestions to postpone. He listened to everything respectfully, but maintained his decision. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't negotiating with anyone. He was responding. The trip was organized, documents prepared, contacts made with local organizations. Still, he asked for something specific. He wanted to arrive without announcements, without cameras, without expectations. He wanted to see with his own eyes, feel with his own heart. When he finally arrived, nothing had prepared him for the sheer impact. No image, no report, no description had managed to convey the reality of that place. The heat, the silence, the way people moved. Everything carried a density that words couldn't express. The children stopped to watch the group arrive, curious but restrained. There was no commotion, no requests, just attentive gazes. He walked slowly, feeling the weight of each step, as if he were crossing not a physical space, but an inner boundary. And then he saw her, the child from the dream. There was no doubt. She was there, a little apart from the others, observing in silence. Their eyes met from a distance. He felt his heart tighten, the same tightness from the dream. The child didn't run, she didn't speak. She only smiled, a simple, tranquil smile, like someone confirming something she already knew. There was no surprise on her face, only recognition. In that instant, he understood something he had never learned in books or in business. Some encounters don't need explanation because they have already happened before, in another place, on another plane. He looked away for a second, took a deep breath, and when he looked back, she was still there, firm, present, waiting. During the visit, he spoke with local leaders, listened to stories, walked among the simple houses, and watched the children playing with almost nothing. Every detail reinforced the certainty that had grown within him since the dream. This was not a project. It was not a one-off action. It was a commitment. Before leaving, he gathered a few people and spoke briefly. He said he would return. He didn't promise dates or immediate solutions. He only stated that it wouldn't end there. The child watched from afar, still smiling, as if already knowing the outcome. And when he left, carrying the weight of that place in his heart, he knew his life would never be the same again. The call had been answered. Now, the response was beginning. When he returned home after that trip, nothing seemed quite right, although everything continued to function as usual. The office remained organized. The reports continued to arrive on time. The numbers remained solid, but something was irreversibly out of place within him. Images of the forgotten place surfaced at the most unlikely moments, not as vague memories, but as insistent presences. He found himself interrupting meetings, staring out the window without noticing the time passing, feeling a weight in his chest that wasn't anguish, but urgency. That hadn't just been a meeting, It had been a point of no return. He knew that, from then on, feeling wasn't enough. He needed to act concretely, profoundly, and continuously, even if it meant reorganizing everything that had defined his life until then. In the first few days, he didn't announce anything publicly. He called a few trusted people and began to speak directly, without long speeches or empty promises. He explained what he had seen, what he had felt, and especially what he could no longer ignore. Some listened attentively, others cautiously, trying to understand where it fit in strategic terms. He didn't offer ready-made answers. He simply said that this wouldn't be a one-off action, nor an image project, but a long-term commitment. For the first time, he made it clear that he wasn't seeking financial return or recognition. He was seeking coherence with something that had been awakened within him and that wouldn't give him rest. Conversations began to multiply. Humanitarian organizations were contacted. Experts in water, agriculture, and infrastructure joined the meetings. He wanted to understand, not just finance. He asked questions, listened, and took notes. He discovered that delivering aid without planning could cause more harm than good. He learned that true transformation doesn't begin with delivery, but with listening. Therefore, before any announcements, he decided to return to the forgotten place, now with technical teams, but maintaining the same care. No fanfare, no public promises. He needed to ensure that what would be done there would not create dependency, but autonomy. Meanwhile, in that distant place, the routine remained harsh, but something had changed. There were no visible signs yet, no concrete improvement, but there was expectation. People whispered about the visit of that man from outside, about his attentive gaze, about the questions he asked, about the respectful way he walked among them. The child from the dream continued to observe. She didn't ask when he would return. She didn't demand anything. She simply waited, with a tranquility that contrasted with the adult's anxiety. For her, something had already been sealed. When the first actions began, they weren't presented as a spectacle. They came as a fulfillment of a need. Trucks arrived with enough food to stabilize the community, not to impress. Technicians began studying the soil, natural sources, and possible planting cycles. A simple water harvesting system was designed with the participation of the residents, respecting what already existed there. He followed everything from a distance, but didn't remain emotionally distant. He called, asked questions, and corrected course when necessary. And more than that, he began to use his influence for something he had never used in that way before: opening doors for others. Governments that had previously ignored that region began to listen. Companies that had never considered investing there started to see the potential, not because he imposed it, but because he presented a clear, sustainable, and humane vision. He didn't just talk about scarcity, he talked about possibility. He showed that with minimal infrastructure, those people could produce, learn, work, and sustain their own transformation. Gradually, alliances were formed, not out of obligation, but through persuasion. The cause ceased to be just his. It became collective. Months later, when he returned to the place, the impact was already visible. There was no wealth, but there was order. Water was now closer. The children no longer had to walk so far to help with basic tasks. Small learning spaces began to emerge, simple, improvised, but full of life. People received him with respect, not with idolatry. He walked among them as he had the first time, but now he felt something different in the atmosphere. There was concrete hope, not the kind that is sustained only by faith, but the kind that is born when results are seen. He searched for the child from his dream with his eyes. He found her sitting near other children, drawing in the dirt. When their eyes met, she slowly stood up and walked towards him. She said nothing. She simply held his hand for a few seconds and smiled in the same calm way as before. He felt a lump in his throat, not from fleeting emotion, but from confirmation. Words weren't needed. That gesture said it all. The process was only beginning, but the path was the right one. Before leaving, he gathered local leaders, families, and young people. He spoke of continuity. He explained that it didn't depend solely on him. He said he would return as many times as necessary, but that the goal was that one day they wouldn't have to wait for anyone from outside anymore. He spoke of education, of work, of dignity. He didn't promise ease, he promised presence. And that, for those who had always been forgotten, was worth more than any speech. On the flight back, he looked down as the land disappeared beneath the clouds. For the first time in a long time, he felt peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because now his wealth had direction. He understood that the calling wasn't about saving, but about serving. It wasn't about being seen, but about making others see. And as he closed his eyes for a few seconds, the child's phrase returned to his mind, now with a new meaning. They were waiting, and he finally understood why. Time passed, and with it came changes that, for a long time, seemed impossible even for those who daydreamed. The place that was once known only for scarcity began to be recognized for its movement. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't quick, and it was certainly not simple. Each advance required dialogue, patience, and difficult decisions. But for the first time, the future ceased to be a distant word and became something that could be planned. Water began to flow in strategic locations, not as an instant miracle, but as a result of collective work. People gathered to learn how to care for, maintain, and protect what was now theirs. And when the first light came on at night, simple and fragile, the silence was broken by a collective murmur of astonishment, not of disbelief, but of restrained gratitude. The children were the first to feel the difference. The day no longer began merely with the struggle for survival, but with the possibility of learning. A simple space was transformed into a school, not with perfect walls, but with purpose. There, letters began to make sense, numbers gained meaning, and stories began to be told not only about a painful past, but about a possible tomorrow. Families watched from a distance, some hesitant to believe it, others with silent tears, because seeing their children learning was something many had never dared to imagine. The man who had once arrived as a visitor now walked among them as someone who understood that the true impact lay not in appearing, but in remaining. The plantations began small, almost timidly. The land, once punished, responded with resilience but also with life. Each sprout that emerged was celebrated as a collective victory. There was no owner, no exclusivity. What grew there belonged to everyone. Over time, small work fronts emerged, local initiatives, shared responsibilities. People who had never received a salary began to understand the value of their own effort. Dignity, so absent for so long, began to take hold. And he observed everything with an almost reverent care, like someone who understands that he is not there to command, but to sustain what has been started. Governments began to officially recognize the region, not because he demanded it, but because the progress had become too visible to ignore. Roads began to be planned, partnerships were formed, opportunities opened up. There were still challenges, many of them, but now something essential existed: continuity. The place no longer depended solely on external aid, but on a structure that allowed it to grow on its own. Amidst all this, he remained vigilant so as not to occupy a space that did not belong to him. His presence was discreet, firm, constant. He had learned that overflowing was not about pouring, but about irrigating. On one of his last visits before returning to his country, he walked alone at dusk, watching the children play, running with a freedom that had never existed before. The sound of laughter mingled with the wind, and for a moment he allowed himself to simply feel. It was then that the child from the dream approached. She was no longer as small as before, but her gaze remained the same, calm, confident, profound. She stopped before him, as she had done in that first encounter that had only existed within a dream, and looked at him in silence. He crouched down to her level and smiled with an emotion that needed no explanation. She didn't say, "Thank you." She didn't say, "You're back." She simply placed her hand on her chest and then pointed around to the houses, to the water, to the people, to the field that was beginning to produce. That simple gesture said it all. He felt his eyes welling up, not with pride, but with humility. He understood in that instant that he had never been the center of the story. He was merely the means by which something greater chose to flow. The dream didn't call him to be a hero, but to be a bridge. At the farewell, there were no long speeches. There were hugs, glances, silent promises of continuity. He left knowing he could always return, but also knowing that that place no longer needed saving. It only needed to be respected. On the plain, as he watched the landscape disappear beneath the clouds, he closed his eyes and for the first time since the dream, felt complete peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because now his wealth had found meaning. He understood that overflowing isn't about losing, it's about aligning. That when someone answers a true calling, the impact goes far beyond what was expected. The destiny of those people had been transformed, yes, but so had his. And while the world kept turning, indifferent to so many invisible stories, one truth remained clear and unwavering. When someone chooses to listen, obey, and remain, even forgotten places learn that they were never alone.